now we're joined by Uche Uwaleke, who's a professor of finance and, of course, the first professor of capital market in Nigeria. Is, of course, of the Nassarawa State University. Also with us is the country director of civic organization Budget Nigeria, Gabriel Okewo. Thank both of you for joining us on News Night tonight. Let me start with you, Professor Uwaleke, right here in the studio with us. Well, let's look at the budget parameters. Crude oil production, 1.78 barrels per day. That's million barrels per day from the last time I checked, it was at 1.35 million barrels per day as at September. Crude benchmark $77.96, of course. Naira exchange rate 750 to the dollar, and that's the official rate. Let's start with that. Is this officially the devaluation of the Naira with this figure that you're seeing? And of course, talk about the other parameters. Yeah,
thanks so much. Let me start by saying it's a welcome development that eventually the budget proposals have been laid before the National Assembly. It has a way of removing uncertainty. What have we witnessed today? The stock market has, responded positively, with some 0.34%, increase in the all-share index. Now, speaking specifically with respect to the benchmarks, in terms of the production, 1.78 million barrels per day. Well, of course, you wouldn't be using something less if OPEC quota allows you, to, do that much. Remember, between production and price, production is what it would appear you have control over. So, if you take what has happened last year, this year, for example, the average, according to the presentation that was made today, has been in the region of, I think, 1.6. Okay, sorry, 1.3. Whereas what was budgeted was 1.69. Now, in terms of the price, $77.9 per barrel. I would also say that somehow it's conservative. Conservative when you take into cognizance projections by the Energy Information Administration that is projected $93 per barrel, for 2024. The World Bank is projecting $80 per barrel for 2024. And if you also check what some other countries have used, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Algeria, what they have used for their 2024 fiscal year in terms of budget. Saudi Arabia, for example, has used $80 per barrel as its break-even oil price, ditto for Egypt. So in that context, you would say 77.9 is therefore conservative, is in order. If you also check the performance of the 2023 budget, recall that the budget price was, the benchmark for 2023 was $75 per barrel. But on the average, according to what we had today, it did $81 per barrel. So if you take all these things into cognizance, you would agree that 77.9 is realistic and is quite conservative. But if you look at other parameters like inflation rates at 21%, if you look at GDP growth rate at 3.76%, exchange rates of 750, okay, what will make it very challenging is the fact that we have unified exchange rates. Okay, if we had a dual exchange rate where one is for official, you could say that could be attained. But with this unification, it's going to be a tall order to achieve that $750, per barrel, because right now it is one single market, willing buyer, willing seller, determining at the NAFEM.
Gabriel, let me quickly come to you. Having listened to the Prof on crude oil production and the crude benchmark, and then a little on inflation rates, let's look at the economic growth of 3.76% forecast for next year. If you compare this to the inflation rate of 21.4%, where does that lead us?
Thank you very much. And eventually we all awaited this first budget presentation by Mr. President, which is a budget process that this administration is going to be owning end to end, and there were a lot of bold statements. There were a lot of, strong assurances in the presentation of this budget, and the growth rate of 3.7% is one that, you know, we can see as a bold statement, considering where we are coming from, considering the current situation right now in the country. And of course, we expect that for us to achieve this target as a nation, there will be a need for not just Mr. President, but every arm of government and the cabinet of the executive cabinet to put and to join hands together to ensure that all that we require for these targets to be achieved are put in place. This will have a lot to do with different sectors, ensuring that particularly the managers of the economic themselves, talking about the budget and planning, talking about the infrastructures that will facilitate and ensure that, you know, businesses are able to thrive, our economy is able to progress in its right direction. The GOEs, the NNPC, practically all sector of our economy will be very, we have a role to play in ensuring that we achieve this target. It is good, it is okay. We'll recall that Mr. President had made, you know, during his manifesto, he had made a promise of 10% growth rate, and if he's starting his first fiscal year with a 3.7, that looks okay to start with, but the boldness in this statement, the boldness in this target, we are not going to be able to assess it now. It is going to be, by the time we are looking at the budget implementation report right from the first quarter of the fiscal year 2024, that we'll be able to tell if we are in the right direction. Currently, the current economic indices right now may look very far, you know, may not look as promising to us to say that an inflation rate of 21% is possible. But if there is anything Nigerians are going to take from this, it is that optimism of if this can be achieved, you know, it will bring a lot of respite to Nigerians. It will ease the current difficulties that many Nigerians are facing. So we'll take this projection as what they are, projection. However, we are going to wait to see how the executive, supported by the other arms of government, the legislators, the judiciaries, and then how much room the executive is also going to give to the media, the development partners, as they have quoted, to support, you know, this process of achieving this target.
Okay, so staying on projections, yeah, projections exactly what they are. Professor Uwaleke, let's talk about the expenditure profile. Non-debt recurrent expenditure stands at 9.92 trillion naira. Capital expenditure 8.7 trillion. Well, you might say the gap is not too much, at least that's what I noticed, but consistently, a recurrent expenditure has been more than capital expenditure, and of course, debt service stands at 8.25 trillion naira. What do you make of this? What does this projection of expenditure profile, what does it say to you when recurrent is still far more than capital expenditure?
Well, if you look at the size of the budget, you know, holistically, there are people that will argue, and to a large extent I agree with them, that even the aggregate expenditure of 27.5 trillion is very small, you know, compared to an economy, you know, the size of Nigeria. Okay, there has been this trending story about you know, comparisons between Nigeria and some other countries. South Africa, for example, with 59 million people, you know, is doing $132 billion budget. Nigeria is doing a budget of less than, you know, $40 billion. Yeah. Okay, so the size really is small. But again, of course, is a function of revenue. There's a limit to which you can push spending when your you know, revenue is very small, because what that means is that, of course, you are increasing your deficit. So it's a worry, really, that recurrent expenditure has continued to dominate, you know, the size of budget. And particularly so when the deficit is also on the high side. Deficit of 3.88% to GDP may appear small, but it's still above the ceiling provided in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. The ceiling is 3%. But what's important is that deficit is coming down. Right. And if you also look at the priorities, I think the priorities are also right in the sense that you find defense. Defense is taking up 12% of the entire budget, about 3.2 trillion. You now have education, 7.9% of the budget, health, 5% of the budget, infrastructure, 5%. So the priorities, tend to be right. Of course, you can't, overstress the importance of, security, and that's why security is taking the largest chunk.
Prof, I'm going to stay with you before you go back to Okeawo. Now, if you look at the projected expenditure, I know that these are assumptions to a large extent, but then the projected expenditure is 27.5 trillion naira, and then the projected income 18.32 trillion naira, and then that gives us a deficit of 9.18 trillion naira.
Yes.
It means that we're planning to spend more than we're planning to make.
Yes.
Now, the current debt, our current debt profile,
yes,
87.38 trillion naira.
Yes.
If you look at that at the second quarter of 2023,
yes,
this year. Now, place that side by side with the fact that we are servicing 87.38 trillion naira with 8.25 trillion naira. What are the optics saying with these figures?
Well, it's a legacy issue. You just mentioned it, 87 trillion, and that 87 trillion was after the Ways and Means. You remember, after all of that, was added, and with this new borrowing, the new borrowing in the budget is over 7 trillion. There is going to be another 1 trillion, by way of loans are going to draw down, and then
$8.6 billion.
Yes, and then privatization proceeds, is not amounting to much. So largely, the deficit is going to be financed by borrowing. But what is important, I must mention here, is the use to which the loans are going to be put. If the loans are going to go into the capital component, then that may not be so much of a worry. But when we borrow for consumption, when we borrow for recurrent, that's where the problem is. All right, loans in themselves are not bad, and that's why I've always, argued, I've always suggested that the right instrument should also be used when we are borrowing, especially when we are borrowing domestically. We should use more of infrastructure bonds, to borrow. We should do more of sukuk. Now, if you look at our domestic debt profile today in Nigeria, the domestic instruments, domestic debt by instruments, you realize that FGM bonds is accounting for over 86%. And FGM bonds have this discretionary feature. You can put them in, anything, not necessarily infrastructure. The real infrastructure bonds, instruments in that debt stock, right, it represents less than 2%. Talking about sukuk and the green bonds. So that is very infinitesimal. That's why we're having this challenge with even debt service. The more we use, we deploy more of project-tied, bonds, and ensure that even if we're financing projects, they're more of self-liquidated, projects. Right. With this issue of, burden, debt service to revenue won't be there. And if you look at what the budget is saying, that the debt service to revenue provided in that budget is just 45%. But usually what happens is that at the end of the day, the the variance, adverse variance you're going to have, becomes, huge. Quite huge.
Very quickly, let me bring in Gabriel Okeawo before we're done. Budget. I mean, the National Assembly, specifically the House of Reps, says, look, we're going to be focusing on three key issues: sustainable debt management, forex conversion, of course, centralized revenue collection, and of course, control expenditure. How important is it for the House or the National Assembly really to provide this oversight function? What do you expect of them?
Thank you very much. I think from those 4 points, the cardinal there would be controlled expenditure. If we start from there, I believe this administration is going to begin to, work in the right path. And I like that even from the speech of Mr. President during this presentation, he made mention of the importance of value for money, transparency and accountability, working with development partners. We are going to really hope that this is going to come into fruition. And one arm of government that can give life to this is the legislators. They have the right, they have the mandate, they have the responsibility to provide oversight. And where oversight is missing, we'll realize that no matter the gains that we are able to make from the economic reforms, it might not really amount to much if that oversight, if that budget monitoring process, if that expenditure control system is lacking in this 2024 fiscal year. So we want to see a situation, and I'm happy that already the Speaker of the House of Representatives has already set a meeting for Monday, a town hall meeting, citizen town hall meeting, to collect feedback from citizens, from media organization, from civil society organization into the budget process. My only concern is why Mr. President has said that he would like that this budget, come into effect 1st of January. This is just barely a month for the National Assembly to work on this. So we don't know how fast and how far they can go in ensuring that they really track the expenditure and the process of ensuring that this budget is properly reviewed. One thing, that was also made mention of in Mr. President's speech is ensuring that MDAs with mandates and capacity are only assigned projects that they can implement.
Great.
These are some of the loopholes that we have seen over the time.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Uwaleke, Professor of Capital Market Financing, and of course, Gabriel Okelwo of Budget, that's the country director. We must say a big thank you to you, gentlemen, for coming on Newsnight.